From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm community engagement producer Nellie Beckett, chopping it up this week. Across the Gulf South, thousands of people are disenfranchised, meaning they've lost their right to vote. Now, the laws behind this can vary from state to state. The right to vote can be taken away for different reasons. For instance, Alabama denies voting rights to people convicted of felonies involving what's called moral turpitude, even though the state constitution does not define which crimes fall under that vague category. So, thousands in the state have lost their right to vote. Mississippi is more complex. Some felony convictions will disenfranchise you, while others don't. That means that some people can, in theory, vote from prison, while others will never be able to vote even after they've completed their sentences. And the reality is, there are a lot of barriers even for legal pathways to voting. And that's what we'll be looking at in this episode. Right now, disenfranchisement in Mississippi is for life. But this year, state lawmakers filed a slew of measures to push for automatic restoration, allowing people to vote once they've completed their sentence. Community engagement reporter Elise Gregg breaks down what happened with those efforts this session, along with how disenfranchisement affects civic engagement across Mississippi.
A concrete pumping company just outside of Jackson is where Frank Martin works 6 to 7 days a week.
Been married for 19 years this year. Got 3 grown children, have a grandchild.
The 46-year-old has also never had the right to vote.
17 years old, I get locked up. I turn 18. I get out. That was the felony possession. I had 1 month left in my probationary bid, and I had got stuck with an embezzlement charge. I didn't know what embezzlement was. I didn't even know it was a thing. And that is the disenfranchising charge that has kept me from voting my entire life.
Martin is one of roughly 70,000 people in Mississippi who are disenfranchised or have lost their right to vote because of a felony conviction, according to 2024 estimates by the Sentencing Project. The Gulf South generally has some of the nation's harshest laws on disenfranchisement. Mississippi's laws are a little complicated, too. Not every crime is disenfranchising, but the 23 that are keep you from voting for life. Paloma Wu, an attorney with the Mississippi Center for Justice, says that's partially because the basis for disenfranchisement is the state's 1890 Constitution.
And that's because the Mississippi Supreme Court has interpreted theft, for example, to mean what it meant in 1890. That's why, identity theft does not take your right to vote away, but felling a tree worth $250 does take your right to vote.
For the last several sessions, state legislators have put forth various bills and constitutional amendments to automatically restore people's rights, either upon sentence completion or after a waiting period. Those measures have all failed, including this year. There are still 2 paths for individual restoration. You can submit an individual suffrage bill in which 2/3 of the House and Senate have to vote to restore your rights, and then that bill has to get signed by the governor. Or the governor can pardon you directly, but neither of those happen very frequently.
You're talking for suffrage acts, you're talking maybe 0 to 6 people a year are going to get their right to vote back.
Martin hasn't applied for either of those, though.
No one had ever said that was a possibility. You get convicted of a felony crime, and they say, you've lost your right to vote, your right to bear arms. They don't educate you and say, well, you can get it back if you do the right thing.
And Martin's not alone. Wu says more could be done to clarify how to get those rights back, or whether you've even lost them at all.
It's just our Secretary of State could do a lot to make it easier for people to know if they've lost their right due to criminal conviction. It wouldn't take much. Number 1, fix the voter registration application to be accurate. And number 2, post by criminal code section which crimes are disenfranchising.
Posting those codes would allow people to exactly pinpoint if they've lost their voting rights. With registration, that would mean clarifying on the actual application sheet that disenfranchising crimes are felonies, not misdemeanors, so folks who can vote do. Mississippi's Secretary of State, Michael Watson, says those are doable things.
Now, putting information out on that, we may have some on the website now. If we don't, that's something easy that we could do, so I have no problems with that. We may could add something in that would help educate them, but it's important for us to, again, educate folks whose job is what, so I know who to hold accountable. And having those phone numbers out there, again, is another way for them to call us.
They just haven't done those things yet. They do have some information on their website about the restoration process, but nothing with criminal codes or a breakdown of the process. Several measures this session actually involved voter education campaigns, an education program through the Department of Corrections, and giving out voter registration applications to eligible offenders. One bill would have even created a public portal for restoration applications. They also all died in committee. The majority of disenfranchised Mississippians, about 48,000 people, have completed their sentences and are back in their communities, like Frank Martin. What he wants, now that he knows he can have it, is a voice.
Like I said, I accepted my fate a long time ago. So I had come to terms with it, and I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm sad, I'm angry a little bit that, this could have happened 20 years ago, 25 years ago, had I would have known.
And he's taking that one step at a time. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Elise Gregg.
You're listening to the Gulf States Gumbo. I'm your host, Nellie Beckett. You just heard about how Mississippi lawmakers filed multiple measures to automatically restore voting rights. And even though the state legislature failed to pass restoration measures this year, lawmakers and advocates are already regrouping for next session. Some proposals pushed this year that could make it back in 2027 actually look a little bit like the current law in a neighboring state. Elise has more on how Louisiana's model for restoration works and what it could look like in Mississippi.
It's late January in Jackson at the Capitol. A group of Mississippians are there to talk to legislators about getting their right to vote back, like Jarvis Jones.
I'm a convicted felon. Got locked up at 16. Got a 15-year sentence for simple armed robbery, right?
These folks have all lost the right to vote because of a felony conviction. Since his release, Jones says the way he's rebuilt his life shows he's ready to have his voting rights back.
I'm also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Mississippi. So that means the state board looked at that and said, hey, we can give them a chance. Why the state can't do it?
Some of them are part of about 48,000 Mississippians who can't vote and have completely finished the terms of their sentences. This year, measures in Mississippi to automatically restore voting rights to these folks died in committee just a few days after their visit to the Capitol. Across the border, though, in Louisiana, some of them would have no problem walking up to the ballot box.
I think the biggest thing that we have going for us in Louisiana is for people on probation to, hands down, have voting rights. Nobody ever sentenced someone to probation wanting them to become less of a citizen.
That's Bruce Riley, Deputy Director of Voice of the Experienced, a voting rights group in Louisiana. Louisiana automatically restores the right to vote after a person's full sentence is complete. If you're on parole, it's restored if you go 5 years without being reincarcerated. Riley says since Louisiana's automatic restoration law came into effect in 2019, it's helped foster civic engagement and connected people with each other.
Well, I definitely see in the community since the law passed, just an acknowledgement of folks who do have criminal convictions, regardless of what it is. You've made it out back into the community, whether it took you 40 years to get there or 40 days to get there.
About 55,000 people in Louisiana are disenfranchised. The majority are in prison, followed by people on parole. In Mississippi, the majority of people who can't vote are living post-sentence. But Riley says there are still some things that act as barriers to voting in his state.
In Louisiana, you have to get the certificate of eligibility piece, and it's not clear who has to get it.
And his organization sees it as a very limited number of people, while he says the state may read that as applying more broadly, for example, to felons who were never previously registered. And with the caveats on who can and can't vote, sometimes it boils down to Louisiana law being confusing both for voters and people facilitating registration. Lily Moons, Policy and Research Director for Mississippi Votes, says a waiting period could equally cause confusion in Mississippi and mean extra time and money for voters.
To avoid any sort of potential liability on the voters' part by certifying that they have met all the conditions, there probably would have to be some sort of documentation or some sort of proof.
And some of the bills didn't specify what counts as an offense in the waiting period. In Mississippi, 23 felonies disenfranchise you, but potentially
if you have gotten to almost the end of the waiting period and you commit a felony that is not technically on that list, then that puts you back in the position of being disenfranchised.
But for Mississippi right now, with its lifetime ban, Moons says it's about moving the needle bit by bit.
Does it remove a large chunk of the current crimes that are disenfranchising? Or does it provide automatic restoration upon that waiting period completion? While it's not perfect, after 5 years, that is going to meaningfully restore a large number of people's right to vote.
Those are things that State Representative Kabir Karim had to consider while crafting restoration bills this year. He included 5-year waiting periods in his, similar to Louisiana.
I'm for automatic voter restoration as soon as you are released. I think you should get your rights back. The 5-year waiting period has always been the compromise.
And they have to compromise, he says, because there's really not much appetite from other lawmakers on passing voting restoration measures. In the meantime, he's hoping they can shape next year's proposals by talking to more Mississippians about what would work best for them to get their voting rights back, and to continue pushing voter education.
It doesn't stop when we gavel out at signing die. We have to continue to work, have the conversation, and again, continue to educate the public on what's going on.
In Mississippi, that's a pool of thousands to hear from. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Elise Gregg.
That was community engagement reporter Elise Gregg covering disenfranchisement in Mississippi. Elise is here with me in the studio for my favorite part of the show, Gulf States Gems. Hey, Elise.
Hi, Nellie.
So, what treasure from our region do you have for us this week?
So for this week, my gem is Restore Your Vote, which is a tool that Lily Muntz with Mississippi Votes showed me. You can access it through the Mississippi Votes website, but it's a program by the Campaign Legal Center that provides voting restoration resources and information for all 50 states.
Oh, wow. That sounds really helpful. How does it work?
So it's a questionnaire-style program that starts by asking you what state you want to register to vote in. From there, it'll ask you whether you've been convicted of a felony and get some details about that conviction, where you're at in your sentence, etc. And based on all that, it'll tell you whether you still have your voting rights, whether you're eligible for restoration if you can't currently vote, and next steps if you are eligible for restoration.
And it gives you specific steps for each state?
Yeah, that's right. I used it to check eligibility in Mississippi and Alabama, and it gave me forms people could fill out with Mississippi Votes, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves' email, and contact information for Alabama's panel on voter restoration. It's pretty detailed in giving you the forms to fill out and the people to reach out to.
Wow, this all sounds like a fantastic resource, but how easy is it to understand when you're taking those next steps? From what we heard in your features, it sounds like this process is really difficult.
Yeah, for me, that's why this is a gem. Because, like folks have talked about, a lot of this stuff is simply confusing for people. The legalese can get kind of tricky. The reality is, some of these processes are, at their core, kind of complicated or even hard to access. But like we heard from folks in Mississippi, having that information out there is critical. This hits that by just letting folks know, this is the law in your state, and here's the first step to working through the current system. This is a resource that can help folks cut through some of the confusion and take real steps to meaningful civic engagement, whatever the restoration process currently looks like for them.
Elise, thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks, Nellie.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Nellie Beckett. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your brew.